If you're listening to this, I need you to understand something before I start. I'm not telling this story for entertainment. I'm telling it because I don't know how much longer I can stay awake, and I don't trust what happens when I finally sleep. I took a job that required me to stay awake for 72 hours straight. They told me it was legal. They told me it was monitored. They told me I could quit anytime. That last part wasn't true. I'm recording this now because something followed me home from that building, and I don't think it needs me to be awake anymore. The ad sounded simple. Sleep deprivation study, high pay, confidential research. I was broke, behind on rent, and desperate enough to ignore the weird parts. The pay was more money than I'd ever seen offered for a 3-day job. All I had to do was stay awake under observation. No drugs, no experiments. Just cameras and monitoring. The woman on the phone said they were studying decision-making under fatigue. Corporate psychology stuff. She sounded bored, like she'd repeated the same script 1,000 times. Looking back, I remember one thing she said that stuck with me. We need people who don't quit easily. I laughed and told her I needed money more than sleep. She didn't laugh back. The building was outside a small industrial town in Arizona. Concrete, windowless, surrounded by chain-link fencing. Nothing fancy, just a research facility that looked like it used to be a warehouse. Inside, it smelled like old carpet cleaner and burned coffee. They took my phone when I checked in, said it interfered with equipment. That was the first time I felt something shift inside me, that instinct that says you should leave before something gets worse. But I stayed. I signed the papers, I met the staff. Cameras everywhere. A small private room with a bed I wasn't allowed to use. Fluorescent lights that never turned off. 72 hours. 3 days. Stay awake. Complete simple tasks. Talk to observers through a speaker when they checked in. Easy money. I remember thinking the worst part would be boredom. I didn't know that by hour 36 I would start hearing footsteps in empty hallways. By hour 50 I would see someone sitting in the corner of my room every time the lights flickered. And by hour 72, I would realize that the people monitoring me were no longer responding. But the cameras were still moving. I shouldn't have finished the job. I shouldn't have left that building alive. Because whatever started watching me in there never stopped. The first 12 hours were boring in the most predictable way. They gave me a small private room, white walls, gray carpet, a desk with puzzles and memory tests, a mounted camera in each corner. There was a bed pushed against the wall with a strap across the mattress to stop me from lying down. That part made me laugh. The speaker on the wall crackled every few hours. A man's voice asking basic questions. How alert do you feel? Any dizziness? Please read the number sequence aloud. It felt clinical and routine. I drank bad coffee from paper cups, walked laps around the room, did logic puzzles. They brought me meals through a slot in the door, like I was in quarantine. Nothing scary, just quiet. Around hour 14 I noticed the hum, a low electrical vibration behind the walls. I assumed it was air conditioning, or servers running somewhere nearby. Industrial buildings always make noise. Like breathing, I told myself that was just my brain looking for patterns. At hour 18 they moved me to a larger observation area. Basically a small open office with multiple cameras and long hallways branching off in different directions. I was allowed to walk around as long as I stayed within marked lines on the floor. I passed other rooms, doors closed, no windows, no sound coming from inside them. I asked the speaker how many participants there were. No answer for a full minute. Then, focus on your tasks. That was the first moment I felt like I wasn't supposed to ask questions. By hour 24, my hands started shaking slightly. Not dramatic, just small tremors when I reached for my coffee. The staff checked in less often. Sometimes the speaker clicked on, but no one talked for several seconds. I'd say hello and hear faint breathing before the line cut. I told myself it was just equipment lag. At hour 28, I walked past a hallway that hadn't been there earlier. Or at least, I didn't remember it. The floor markings stopped at its entrance, like I wasn't supposed to go in. I stood there longer than I should have, staring into the dim corridor. The lights flickered every few seconds, and the hum from the walls was louder there. I stepped forward. The speaker snapped on immediately. Return to your designated area. The voice sounded different, tired, strained. I backed away. Normal explanation. Sleep deprivation makes your memory unreliable. Maybe the hallway had always been there. I repeated that to myself until I believed it. But that night, or what I assumed was night, the lights dimmed for exactly 10 seconds. When they came back on, one of the hallway doors behind me was open. I hadn't heard it open, and I was sure it had been closed before. By hour 36, I couldn't trust my sense of time anymore. The clocks were digital and mounted high on the walls, but I kept checking them and feeling like the numbers jumped forward too fast or stayed frozen too long. The hum in the walls got louder. Sometimes it stopped completely, and the silence felt heavier than any sound. That was when I heard the footsteps for the first time. Slow, measured, somewhere behind me, while I was doing a memory test in the desk. I turned around expecting a staff member, maybe another participant. Empty hallway. I laughed out loud, because that's what you do when your brain starts playing tricks. I told the camera I was fine. Said I knew hallucinations were part of sleep deprivation. The speaker didn't respond. At hour 42, I noticed something else. The cameras moved. Not all at once, just small adjustments. Mechanical shifts like someone was repositioning them remotely. Except when I looked directly at one, it stopped. I tested it, walked across the room pretending not to watch. I saw the lens turn slowly to follow me. The second I turned my head toward it, still. I reported it through the speaker. No response. Meals stopped arriving on schedule. Water bottles were left outside my door, but no one came inside. The building felt emptier every hour. Around hour 50, the lights flickered longer than before. When they came back on, someone was sitting in the far corner of the observation room, wearing the same gray clothes they'd given me. I froze. I blinked, and the corner was empty. I told myself it was a micro-sleep hallucination. Your brain starts dreaming while your eyes are open when you're exhausted enough. Perfectly normal. But the next time the lights flickered, I didn't look away, and the man was there again, closer. I ran toward the hallway cameras, waving my arms, yelling for staff. The speaker crackled, but no voice came through. Just that breathing sound again, heavy and uneven. That was when I realized I hadn't seen a single staff member in person since hour 20, and none of the locked doors were opening anymore. By hour 58, my thoughts felt slippery. Words came out wrong. I kept repeating the same questions to empty rooms. The hum in the walls turned into something like whispering. Not actual words, just the rhythm of speech without language. I pressed my ear against the drywall, trying to figure out where it was coming from. That was when the panic hit. One of the hallway doors slammed shut behind me, loud enough to make my chest vibrate. I ran back toward the main room, heart racing, hands shaking so badly I dropped my water bottle. I started banging on the exit door. No keypad response, no staff voice, just cameras turning slowly to watch me lose control. At hour 63, I had my first moment of complete paralysis. The lights dimmed and stayed dim. I stood in the center of the room and felt something behind me, not touching me, just standing close enough that I could feel warmth on my neck. I couldn't move. I couldn't turn around. The cameras were all pointed directly at me, unmoving, like they were waiting. When I finally forced myself to spin around, nothing was there. But one of the hallway doors was wide open, and inside that room was a chair facing the wall, with deep scratch marks carved into the paint. That's where I realized something was wrong with the entire study. Not just my brain, not just sleep deprivation. Because the cameras started moving in perfect sync, all turning to face that open doorway at the exact same time. And the speaker finally came alive again. "You're almost finished," the voice said, flat and distant. "Stay awake. If you're still listening and you want more real confessions like this, consider subscribing to Nightmare Crypt. I didn't think anyone would ever hear this, but maybe it helps someone else walk away before it's too late." Hour 72 came without warning. The clocks froze at 11:59 and never changed again. The hum in the walls stopped completely. Silence. Then every hallway light shut off except one, the corridor I wasn't allowed to enter. The cameras rotated toward it. The speaker whispered, "Exit interview." I walked down that hallway because I didn't see any other way out. The floor felt sticky under my shoes. The air smelled like metal and old sweat. Every door along the corridor was slightly open now, and I saw empty rooms with chairs bolted to the floor, restraints hanging loose. At the very end was a final door, unlocked. Inside was a control room filled with monitors showing every camera angle from the building, and every screen was still recording, but there were no staff, no paperwork, no personal items, just chairs pushed back like people had stood up in a hurry and never returned. And on one monitor, I saw myself standing in the hallway outside the room, but the footage was delayed, because behind the version of me on screen, someone else was standing there, watching me. I turned around. The hallway was empty, but the cameras in the control room all started moving at once, slowly tracking something walking toward me that I couldn't see. The door behind me slammed shut, and for the first time in 72 hours, the lights went completely black. Darkness swallowed the control room so completely that I couldn't even see my hands in front of my face. For a few seconds I stood there frozen, convinced I'd finally collapsed, that my brain had shut down, and this was the moment I stopped existing. Then I heard movement. Not loud, not dramatic, just the quiet shuffle of something crossing the floor behind me. Slow, careful steps, like whoever it was didn't want to make noise, but also didn't care if I heard them coming. I slammed my back against the wall and slid my hands across the control panel, searching for anything. A switch, a keyboard, a door handle. The monitors flickered back on one by one, lighting the room in a sick green glow. Every screen showed me. Dozens of angles. Me standing there shaking, eyes wide, trying not to breathe too loud. But on every screen there was also movement behind me. A tall shape standing just out of frame. Always almost visible. Always one step closer than it should have been. I spun around. Nothing. The hallway outside the control room was empty. I told myself it was hallucination layering over delayed video. Sleep deprivation makes your brain chase patterns. I repeated that explanation like a mantra, forcing myself to move toward the exit door on the far side of the room. It didn't open. I pulled harder. The handle rattled uselessly in my hands. No keypad, no release button, just a solid metal door that might as well have been welded shut. Behind me, one of the monitors let out a loud static crack. The screen zoomed automatically, focusing on my face. I watched my own eyes widen as something moved behind me on camera again. Closer this time, almost touching my shoulder. I felt air shift against my neck. That was the moment of pure panic. I lost whatever control I had left. I grabbed a chair and hurled it into the wall of monitors. Glass shattered. Sparks jumped from exposed wires. Alarms started screaming somewhere deep in the building. Low, mechanical wails that echoed through the ventilation. The lights flickered wildly, and for the first time, I saw someone else in the room. Not clearly, just a shape reflected in the cracked glass of a dark monitor. A person standing too still. Head tilted slightly to one side like they were studying me. Coffee cups dried into rings on desks. Everywhere I went, the cameras followed. I could hear their motors adjusting overhead. Small mechanical clicks, tracking my movement like a predator adjusting its gaze. I reached the main observation room where I'd spent most of the study. The lights were dimmer now, flickering in uneven pulses. The chair with the scratch marks I'd seen earlier was in the center of the floor, no longer pushed against the wall, and someone was sitting in it. The same gray clothes as me, same build, same posture. I froze in the doorway. They didn't move, didn't look at me, just sat there with their back turned, head lowered, like they were waiting for instructions. My brain tried to explain it. Another participant, someone else from the study, finally released from their room. I forced myself to speak. "Hey," I said, voice cracking. Are you done too?" No answer. I took one step forward. The lights flickered, and when they came back on, the chair was empty. That was the moment of paralyzing dread. I felt it settle into my bones like cold water. Every instinct in my body told me that whatever I'd seen wasn't a hallucination anymore. It was a pattern, something repeating itself over and over until I noticed. The speaker crackled again. Final evaluation, the same flat voice said, "Remain awake." I screamed at it, asked where the staff were, asked why the doors were locked, asked if anyone else was alive in the building. No response. Just breathing through the speaker. Slow, uneven, almost exhausted. I stumbled toward the main exit. The door that had been locked earlier now hung slightly open. Emergency lights glowed red in the hallway beyond it, guiding me toward the front lobby. Messier, dirtier, like no one had cleaned it in weeks. Dust coated the reception desk. Papers were yellowed at the edges. A calendar on the wall showed a date from 2 months earlier. That's when the realization hit me. I didn't know how long I'd actually been inside. The clocks had stopped. The staff had disappeared. Meals had stopped arriving long before hour 72. And the cameras never stopped moving. I reached the front doors and shoved them open. Cold desert air hit my face like a slap. The parking lot was empty except for my car and one rusted security vehicle with flat tires. The sun was setting, or maybe rising, I couldn't tell anymore. I ran to my car and fumbled for the keys they'd given back to me in a plastic envelope on the dashboard. I didn't remember being escorted out. When I drove back there yesterday, the warehouse was gone. Just an empty fenced lot with cracked concrete and weeds growing through it like it had been abandoned for years. But my bank account has the payment, and the envelope with my name on it is still sitting on my kitchen table. I don't know what the study was measuring. I don't know who was watching me. I only know that the cameras never stopped recording, and whatever was standing just outside their frame is still here. I can feel it every time the lights flicker. If you see a job listing asking you to stay awake, especially if they promise easy money and no supervision, walk away. Don't sign anything. Don't give them your phone. Don't let them lock you in a room where the lights never turn off. Because I think the study ended a long time ago, and the only thing still running is whatever learned to watch people who can't sleep. I shouldn't still be alive after what happened next. I keep telling myself that. I keep trying to believe that the worst part ended when I drove away from that building, but that wasn't the end of anything. That was just the moment whatever followed me realized it didn't need the cameras anymore. The first night back home, I stayed awake on purpose. I dragged a chair into the middle of my living room and sat there with every light on. I drank coffee until my hands shook so badly I couldn't hold the mug. I told myself if I stayed awake, nothing could happen. That was the rule the study drilled into me. Remain awake, remain aware, remain safe. Around 3 a.m. my power flickered, a soft dip in brightness, like someone had briefly covered a lamp with their hand. Every sound in the apartment felt amplified. The hum of the refrigerator, pipes ticking behind the walls, footsteps from my upstairs neighbor that sounded too slow, too deliberate. I kept expecting to hear the mechanical click of a camera adjusting, but there were none left, at least none I could see. I walked through every room again with a flashlight. Closet, bathroom, under the bed, nothing. I even opened the fuse box to make sure no one had tampered with it. That's when I noticed the scratch marks. Thin, shallow lines on the inside of my front door at about shoulder height. Dozens of them, running parallel like someone had dragged their fingernails down the paint over and over. They weren't there before I left for the study. I know they weren't. I told myself maybe they'd always been there, and I just never noticed. Sleep deprivation still messing with my memory. I said it out loud like repeating it would make it real. But the lines were fresh. Paint flakes still clung to the edges. The next morning, I found the first video file on my laptop. The computer had been unplugged since I got home. I hadn't turned it on once. But when I finally powered it up to email the company again, even though I knew the address bounced back, there was a folder on the desktop labeled Session 73. Inside were hours of footage. Me sitting in my apartment chair the night before, staring straight ahead. Recorded from angles that didn't exist in my home. High corners, ceiling views, tight close-ups from just behind my shoulder. I watched for maybe 30 seconds before slamming the laptop shut. My reflection in the black screen lingered a moment longer than it should have, and just before it went dark, I saw movement behind my chair. I didn't look. That was the beginning of the full descent. The moment I realized the study never actually ended when the doors opened, I started losing control of time again. I'd sit down for a minute, and suddenly it would be hours later with no memory of moving. My phone filled with missed calls from numbers that disappeared when I tried to dial back. I stopped answering the door after I opened it once and found no one there. Just a small black lens taped to the frame at eye level. I ripped it off and crushed it under my shoe. Clear fluid leaked out, smelling faintly like warm plastic and something sour. That night, the panic came back full force. I was in the bathroom brushing my teeth when the lights went out completely. Not a flicker, a full blackout that swallowed the room. The only illumination came from the hallway where my bedroom light was still on, and I saw a shadow cross the doorway. Not a fast movement, not something I could dismiss as headlights from outside. A slow, deliberate silhouette walking past, head tilted like it had been in the control room. I ran into the hall and slammed every light switch on. Nothing. Every room empty. But the bedroom camera, the one I swear I had unplugged, was sitting on my dresser, lens facing the bed. Its red light blinked once when I stepped into the room. That was my loss of control realization. I smashed it with a hammer until the casing split open. There were no wires inside, no battery, just a hollow shell and a tiny black square embedded in the center like a pupil. I stopped going outside after that. I taped paper over the windows. I stopped answering messages from friends because I didn't know how to explain why I couldn't sleep, or why I kept checking over my shoulder in empty rooms. And then came the moment I can't undo. 2 nights ago, I think, I finally crashed. Not real sleep, just that heavy blackout where your body shuts down whether you want it to or not. I woke up on my couch with my mouth dry and my head pounding. Every light in the apartment was off. My phone sat on my chest playing a video automatically. It was me again, sitting exactly where I was now, but the timestamp said it was recorded while I was unconscious. In the footage, my eyes were open, wide, unblinking, my chest barely moving, and behind me, someone else stepped into frame. They didn't touch me. They just stood there, watching the way the cameras used to watch in the study. After a few seconds, they leaned down toward my ear. The audio was silent except for that familiar breathing. Then my body in the video nodded slowly, like I'd agreed to something. When I tried to pause the footage, my phone locked itself. The screen went black and reflected my face. And for a split second, I saw the same figure standing behind me in real life, exactly where it had been in the recording. I didn't turn around. I couldn't, because I understood then that whatever the study was doing, it wasn't just watching me stay awake. It was training something to recognize people who couldn't sleep, people whose minds were too tired to tell what was real anymore. Yesterday I drove back to the empty lot one more time. I thought maybe if I stood there long enough, I'd find proof the building existed. Something to ground me. Something that would make this feel like a bad experiment instead of an infection. There were tire tracks in the dirt that led nowhere. Burn marks in a square pattern like something massive had been dragged away. And in the center of the concrete slab, a single office chair with deep scratch marks carved into the arms. My initials were carved into the backrest. I don't remember doing that. When I got home tonight, the envelope from the company was open on my kitchen table, even though I left it sealed. Inside was a new contract, printed on the same gray paper, with one line highlighted. Session continues outside controlled environment. My apartment lights just flickered again while I was typing this. The hum is back in the walls. My laptop camera light keeps turning on by itself, even though I covered it with tape. And I can feel someone standing behind me right now, not touching me, not breathing loud enough to hear clearly, just waiting the way they waited in every room of that building. If this cuts off suddenly, it's because I finally fell asleep. And I don't think anyone who completes Session 73 is ever alone again. I haven't slept since I wrote that last part. I keep telling myself I won't, that if I stay awake long enough, Maybe whatever's following me will lose interest. That was the lie the study planted in my head. Stay awake and you're safe. Stay awake and you stay in control. But the truth is worse. The longer I stay awake now, the more control I lose. Right after I stopped typing before, my laptop screen went black on its own. Not powered off, just dead black like a turned off TV. I could still hear the fan spinning and the keys clicking when I touched them, but nothing appeared on the screen. Then the webcam light came on again. I had it taped over. 2 layers of electrical tape. But I could see the glow bleeding through the edges like a slow pulse. I reached forward to rip the tape off. Before my hand touched the lid, the screen flashed back to life. A live feed opened automatically. It showed me sitting at the table exactly where I was, except the camera angle was from behind my left shoulder, high and tilted downward, like one of the control room cameras from the study. I froze, because in the video, there was a second chair directly behind me, and someone was already sitting in it. The figure looked normal at first glance. Hoodie, jeans, hands folded in their lap, but their posture was wrong. Too still, too balanced, the same unnatural stillness as the observers behind the glass. I told myself it was pre-recorded footage, some kind of glitch. But when I moved my right hand slowly up into frame, the version of me in the video did the same motion at the exact same time. The figure behind me didn't move at all. That was the paralyzing dread moment. My chest locked, like I'd forgotten how. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours, terrified that if I turned around, the chair behind me would be occupied. Then the figure in the video leaned forward slightly, its head tilted, and its hands lifted slowly, reaching toward my shoulders in the footage. I lost it. I grabbed the laptop and hurled it across the room. It smashed against the wall and the screen cracked into a spiderweb pattern. But even on the broken display, the live feed kept playing for a few seconds longer. The last frame froze with the figure's hands inches from my neck. The room behind me was still empty when I finally forced myself to look. Empty, but wrong. The second chair was there now. I don't own a second chair. I dragged it into the hallway and shoved it into a closet. I wedged boxes against the door. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely grip anything. I kept hearing faint clicks in the apartment, like tiny mechanical adjustments. That's when the pure panic moment hit. Every light in my place turned off at once. Not a power outage, just the switches flipping down on their own, one after another down the hallway like someone walking past them. I heard the soft plastic clicks moving closer to the living room. Click, click, click. The last switch, right next to where I was standing, snapped downward by itself. The room fell completely dark. I ran for the front door, fumbling with the lock, but the deadbolt wouldn't turn. It felt welded in place. I yanked on it until my palm burned. Behind me, I heard a chair scrape across the floor. Slow, careful, measured. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I pressed my forehead against the door and tried to breathe quietly like I used to during the study, when I thought the observers couldn't hear me if I stayed still. Something stopped just behind me. No footsteps, no breathing, just presence, heavy and patient. Then a faint mechanical whir came from somewhere above my head. The hallway smoke detector lens flicked open. A tiny red light blinked. I don't remember screaming, but my throat was raw the next morning, so I must have. Because the next thing I remember clearly is waking up on the floor near the couch, with every light on again, and the deadbolt unlocked. The closet door where I shoved the second chair was wide open. The chair was back at the table across from mine, facing me. That was when I understood the climax had already started. Not a single moment, but a slow, irreversible change. The study didn't just observe sleep deprivation. It learned how people break when they stop trusting their own perception. I tried to leave again today, packed a bag, drove 3 hours north without stopping, checked into a motel off the highway. I thought distance would help. The room looked normal, cheap carpet, humming AC unit, the smell of stale smoke. I sat on the edge of the bed and forced myself to keep my eyes open, watching the digital clock tick forward. At some point, I realized the numbers weren't changing. 11:47 p.m. 11:47 p.m. 11:47 p.m. I pulled out my phone to check the time there and found a new notification. Session 73, remote observation active. The motel TV turned on by itself. Static filled the screen, then shifted into a multi-camera grid. Angles of the room I was currently sitting in from corners that didn't exist. I saw myself from behind, from directly in front, even though nothing was in front of me but a blank wall. And in one of the camera windows, the bed behind me dipped slowly like someone invisible had just sat down. I didn't stay. I grabbed my bag and ran straight back to the car. I drove home without stopping because I realized something awful. It doesn't matter where I go. The cameras aren't tied to the building anymore. They're tied to me. I'm back at my apartment now, typing this as fast as I can because I don't think I have much time before my body forces me to shut down again. My hands keep slipping on the keys. Words disappear from the screen and reappear in places I didn't type them. And there are more chairs now. 3 of them around my table, all facing me. I don't remember bringing them in. The hum in the walls is louder than ever. It sounds like breathing layered over a faint electric buzz. Every few minutes, one of the overhead lights flickers like a camera shutter. I think the study wasn't about staying awake. It was about training something to observe people who can't tell when they've crossed the line between exhaustion and surrender. People who become easier to guide, easier to reposition, easier to replace. I don't know what happened during the hours I can't remember. I don't know what agreement the version of me in that video nodded to. But I know this, I'm not the only one they're watching now. If you've taken any kind of extreme sleep study job, if you've worked overnight surveillance, if you've stayed awake for days straight and started noticing cameras where there shouldn't be any, stop before you reach 72 hours. Don't accept extra pay to keep going. Don't sign anything that says observation continues after discharge. Because once session 73 starts, it doesn't end when you walk out the door. The chairs keep multiplying. I can hear one moving behind me right now, legs scraping slowly across the floor even though I'm the only one here. My screen just flashed to that same multi-camera grid again. And in one of the feeds I'm already slumped forward, eyes open, not typing, just staring straight ahead while something leans over my shoulder. I don't know which version of me is real anymore. If this post goes through, it means I'm still awake for a few more minutes. If it cuts off mid-sentence, it means I finally lost the fight. And if you ever find yourself sitting alone in a room you don't remember entering, surrounded by chairs you don't own, with a faint red light blinking somewhere you can't locate, don't assume you're being watched. Assume you've already been replaced, and the version of you still typing is just the last recording before session 73 continues without you.